6 weeks after we met, we got married. And then we moved to Vienna and then to London. And then we got calls from Eric Moss at SciArc and ended up back in Los Angeles, which I never thought I would be. And what was interesting in that time that I was away from LA really changed. And it had a metro suddenly, and you had the Disney Concert Hall was completed. I had worked on it as a student, but yeah, LA, those 15 years of being away were transformative for the city, and it was just wonderful being new to the city again and seeing it through the eyes of my immigrant husband, German, who was just kind of shocked and very stunned by the city in good and bad ways.
This is Five Places, Los Angeles, a living documentary of the city produced by the LA Forum for Architecture and Urban Design. I'm Ingalill Wahlroos-Ritter, and in each episode, I ask one interviewee about the 5 places that define Los Angeles for them. Today, my guest is the wonderful Ingalill Wahlroos-Ritter, an architect, educator, and community leader advocating for architecture to advance environmental and social justice. Ingalill is a professor in the architecture department at East Los Angeles College and serves as president of Architecture for Communities Los Angeles, ACLA, a nonprofit organization launched by AIALA to focus on education and community outreach. In partnership with Roland Wahlroos-Ritter, her architectural practice, W Road, navigates transdisciplinary territory in a diverse type and scale of projects. One of their latest projects is the renovation of the Los Angeles Mission, one of the nation's largest service providers of the unhoused. Ingalill has forged educational pathways and launched programs that support her vision of education for all. She served as Dean of Woodbury School of Architecture from 2016 to 2021 and has taught at Yale, Cornell, the Bartlett, and SciArc. As founder and director of WUHO, the Woodbury University Hollywood Gallery, she produced over 100 exhibitions celebrating social justice-focused design. She was elevated to the AIA College of Fellows in 2018 and has received multiple awards for her work as an educator. Ingalill and I continued talking well beyond her 5 places. Stay tuned after the credits for a collection of outtakes in which we talk about the Finnish word for cat, and Ingalill takes us on a tour of some of the art in her wonderful dingbat apartment. Let's drop in.
It was really fun to think about this.
I'll tell you something. I haven't figured out my own 5 places yet.
Oh.
I think about it a lot. And I love hearing other people's 5 places.
I think, I listened to a couple of the podcasts and I just love hearing it filtered through people's experiences and, the life stories and what's meaningful to people. So that's really, really beautiful.
I mean, that's what it's all about. And I love the fact that the same place might recur, but through a completely different perspective.
Yes.
Coming from different people's lived experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to combine the first few questions and ask you, how long have you lived in LA and what brought you to LA?
I was born in Los Angeles, so it was my parents.
Wow, I actually didn't realize that.
No, so since you ask, I was born in San Fernando Valley in the Valley Presbyterian Hospital in Van Nuys. I have a twin brother. Both my parents are immigrants. My mother was a refugee for 7 years. She lived in a displaced persons camp. She left Hungary right after World War II, ended up in Austria in this camp. And my father was a scholarship student from Finland. So my mother wanted us to be born in the United States. And when we were a year old, we then moved to Finland. So I'm a dual citizen, Finland, America, United States. And for the next 14 years, I then moved between Finland, where I learned the language, and the San Fernando Valley. So I'm a Valley girl. and was born, and then high school, all through high school, and then college and university here in Los Angeles.
What a wonderful dual experience.
It was amazing. And, when I talk about myself, I show this slide of Helsinki right next to Van Nuys Boulevard. And I talk about these two sides of myself and how strongly they've really imprinted themselves on me. So I'm a product of, both the incredible public school system in Finland, but also here in Los Angeles. And, segregation. There was busing when I was a student. I remember when Kamala Harris was talking about this moment in Los Angeles, I'm like, oh, that was Granada Hills High School when we had kids coming from South Los Angeles being bused in. And that was my childhood. And, of course, you begin to be aware of these things later in life and what they, how unequal they were. But it was this moment in time in the Los Angeles history that's very deeply imprinted itself on me. So,
for sure. So you've seen a lot of evolution in the city.
Yeah. So I then went to UCLA, got my master's of architecture degree there, and I went back to Finland, almost stayed there and worked there because all my family's in Europe. And then came back. It was actually the winter hit. By that age, I was like, okay, I wasn't prepared for it. What is it they say, that it's not bad weather, it's bad clothes. So I came back to Los Angeles.
I disagree.
Yeah, it can be very extreme. Came back to Los Angeles, worked for some of my former faculty members, and then moved to New York City, where I lived there for 10 years. Met my husband, who was a visiting professor from Vienna, from Austria. We were teaching at Cornell, and the chair, Nazreen Siraji, invited a professor. 6 weeks after we met, we got married. And then we moved to Vienna, and then to London. And then we got calls from Eric Moss at SciArc and ended up back in Los Angeles, which I never thought I would be. And what was interesting in that time that I was away from LA really changed. And, it had a metro suddenly. And, you had the Disney Concert Hall was completed. I had worked on it as a student. Michael Molson was my former boss. I always tease him about that. But yeah, LA, those 15 years of being away were transformative for the city. And it was just wonderful being, new to the city again and seeing it through the eyes of my immigrant husband, German, who was just kind of shocked and very stunned by the city. In good and bad ways. And I'll talk about that in one of my choices. So
great. Oh, I look forward to that. Well, you have such a richly layered experience of the city, from having experienced it at different phases in your life and its evolution, and having lived in other cities too, I think really affects the way we see LA.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you didn't think you would come back. It kind of surprised.
No, I didn't. I left LA, and then suddenly, I thought, okay, it was actually 1994, the earthquake that year, literally a month after the earthquake, I left Los Angeles, and it was in my rearview mirror. And I thought, I love New York. And then I, moved to Europe. I thought, oh my gosh, I love it here. But I will say, I have noticed that I like this reinvention idea, where it's like, okay, I'm now starting something new, a new initiative. And what's great about LA is that you don't have to leave LA to do that. I think you've discovered that also. And there's so many amazing neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And if you choose to move, say, to, the mountains, or to a totally different environment or ecology, then you can really craft a different way of life. And that's not something you find. I mean, in New York, you're like, I'm living the New York way. And, I go out for the summers. I'm, very urban. Of course, things have changed since the pandemic, but Los Angeles always offered all of those different lifestyles. And I thought that was fantastic. So I think we're here, at least for the short term.
That is an amazing advantage in LA, that we have you're right, these different kinds of lives available to us. I mean, mostly, you have to be lucky to a certain degree to have.
Absolutely. And, so I ended up back in the Valley actually for 17 years working at Woodbury University. So there I was, you can take the girl out of the Valley, but you can't take the Valley out of the girl. So there I was, 17 years at Woodbury University in Burbank, teaching and loving every second of it. I was dean for many years there. And then just a couple of years ago, stepped down. They offered me an early retirement package, and have now reinvented myself, and am finding new neighborhoods and new places in Los Angeles. And that's so exciting. And wonderful. I feel re-energized. And that's why this interview comes at a really perfect moment. So thanks for
great.
Yeah.
Well, I know you did extraordinary work at Woodbury, and that's like a whole other conversation. But since this is, about Los Angeles and the 5 places that define the city for you, I'd love to hear about your first place.
Okay, so my first one, as you know, I just came back from a 6-week vacation with my 15-year-old. The first one is 10,000 feet in the air. It's being in an airplane approaching LAX. And I see you nodding because all of us know that moment. And I'm just talking about it brings chills to my body. And there you are approaching Los Angeles, and especially if you're lucky enough to do it at night. And of course, it's a privileged position to be up there. But that moment of just arriving to the city, whether you're a visitor or it's your home, you come in over the desert and you see the mountains and the landscape, and you're above some of the desert cities, and little by little the city starts forming itself, pixelating and becoming, and you begin to see the blocks forming, and then you start to recognize, it's like, oh, that looks like Ontario Airport or San Bernardino, the mountains, and San Gabriel's, and then you start like, oh, that's Baldwin. Oh, it's the towers of Los Angeles, and you look at them and you can't stop looking at them. And then you see that line of towers along Wilshire Boulevard, and you're like, when I was a student at UCLA, that was what we talked about as downtown, was this linear, artery that went from downtown Los Angeles, all, and all the high rises along there, and you see it. And of course, you fly in over Inglewood, and there used to be the Forum, and now it's the SoFi Stadium. And then there's the 405 freeway. And you've arrived, and
it's
exactly. And especially at night, that river of the white lights and the red lights, and it's just magical. And so, when I was living in New York, there was an article that came out. I was actually working for another Los Angelino, Laurie Hawkinson. So Henry Smith Mill and Laurie Hawkinson. And I remember in 1998, there was an article in the New Yorker written by Lawrence Weschler, and it was called LA Glows. And the subtext was the science and poetry of the light in Los Angeles. What's amazing, I went back to the article and I remember reading it, and Lori and I were talking about it. We're like, the light, we miss it so much. And I thought, well, it's actually more than the light. It's that moment you come in over the mountain and suddenly it's calm. It's like still. And no matter how turbulent the plane has been before then, there's a stillness to it. And so I went back to this article just yesterday, and it's true. And so he went and talked to the scientists, and he went and talked to the scientists at Caltech, and all the observatories. There's a reason why there's so many of them in Los Angeles, but it's this stillness of the air that is so much a part of the Los Angeles experience, so different from, say, Arizona, all of the other desert cities, and it also creates these different effects, just visual optical illusions almost. So I think that that's really remarkable. And so, I wanted to mention that when my husband and I moved to Los Angeles, Roland hated Los Angeles. He just couldn't get it, So here's this person from Vienna, the most comprehensible city in the world. Yeah. And, he had been born in Munich. He's, from Southern Germany. And, of course, what he knows, he studied urbanism, and he come to this messy city, and, we all know how messy it is. But he started flying. And so it was through flying. So he became a recreational pilot, and we own this little tiny airplane. It sounds very shishi, but literally we paid $30,000 for it. It's a Piper Cherokee, so it's cheaper than most cars. And we fly, and through flying, Roland fell in love with Los Angeles. It is the perfect, has the perfect air quality, the light. You can fly 364 days of the year. There's this sort of sub kind of culture of the flying, and there's little airports everywhere. It's part of the historical aeronautical military history of Los Angeles. So you fly over LA and you see these little airports everywhere, and you don't even realize that there's one in Torrance. I didn't even realize that you have these little airports everywhere. But that's really the best way to see and understand the city, I think, is 3,000 feet in the air. So place number one.
That's beautiful. And so he not only just the beauty of the air and the stillness of the air, but understanding the layout of the city and making sense of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's this tapestry, and it's a patchwork quilt. I mean, there's so many different metaphors, and Barbara Bester, talks about the smog and the sunshine, and up in the air, you see the land, you see zoning, you see, all of those decisions that the city makers over the years, I wrote this essay about Paul Revere Williams a couple of years ago, and he was part of working with some of the city planners, and it was kind of interesting to understand the voices that were participating in the decision making. Of course, we know all about redlining, and but you see it. You see the decisions that were made, and you see the industrial zones and then the residential zones. You see these creeping into the foothills. You understand the fire hazards. You see the edge of the ocean, and how so much of it is private. That's unheard of in most cities. That this incredible resource that we have isn't even accessible to people, and so, but it's really comprehensible. So we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, but until you're up in the air, you really don't physically understand it. So I think that is a really remarkable way to understand and then see Los Angeles.
And your 15-year-old flies now too.
My 15-year-old started flying around the age of 13. So at 14, they received a pilot's license from the FAA, this laminated license. They are an official student pilot. So they are flying, and it's amazing that you can fly before you can drive.
It is, in a way, but it also, I think it's such an incredible, what an experience.
Empowering. It is empowering. And just, watching the confidence and just the ability, pilot a craft that you're responsible for. And, there's a whole other, again, ecology up in the air, and, and you're constantly talking, and it's all sound waves, it's the control towers and people telling you what elevation you should be at. And so it's three-dimensional, and, you start feeling this, especially when you're in a small craft, you feel the air movements, and you feel these, you see the clouds, of course, and you begin to understand it and you begin to understand the environment in which we live in a very, very real way. So it's a really great experience for a teenager to have. So
absolutely. Good for Ash.
Yeah.
And do you fly as well?
I sit in the back reading my book and try not to think about the fact that there's one propeller keeping us aloft. So yeah, no,
safer there than on the 405.
Yeah. Honestly. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I have researched it, and I have no interest in learning to fly, so I'm a very happy passenger.
Shall we move on to your second place?
Yeah. So
a little closer to the ground.
Exactly. So yes, we are going to get closer to the ground, and the second place I chose was Grand Park. And it was designed Rios Clemente Hill, 2012, but it was just a couple months ago renamed the Gloria Molina Grand Park, which I didn't realize until I was studying this. And I wanted to talk, the reason I chose it is because we talked a little bit about, Los Angeles and all of its neighborhoods, but, Los Angeles has this reputation for not having spaces of collection, the piazza or the urban collecting space. And I think Grand Park really filled a need that the city desperately needed. I think Pershing Square, of course, comes to mind, but that's I've heard that there's going to be another competition. I was a student when Legorreta won that competition. I always really loved the colors. So color is a sub-theme here of some of my choices. But the Grand Park, who I wanted to talk about a little bit was Deborah Sussman, who was the designer. She was the environmental designer of Grand Park. It was her last project she did before she passed away. And if you go, first of all, it is now our place of protest. So of course, the Women's March, we were all there with our pussy hats, and the murder of George Floyd, the 2020 protests. So the city now has a place. And what I love about it is that there it is, spanning between City Hall and the Music Center, so you have these two anchors that are part of this incredible topography that again reflects some of the topography of Los Angeles that changes, I think, about 100-foot change in elevation. But then you have scattered throughout this park all these really beautiful experiences, and they're all marked by color. So you have these wonderful pink benches, and then you have these kiosks and the water fountains and this incredible landscape, that's so beautiful and refers then to the landscape of Southern California. But Deborah Sussman, the designer, passed away in 2014, really was a pioneer, and she broke so many boundaries. And it wasn't just gender boundaries, but it was also disciplinary boundaries. So really forcing us to think, what is architecture? Is architecture the building, or is architecture also the surroundings around us? So wayfinding, for example, is that architecture? She was, of course, the designer of the look of the Los Angeles Olympics. We're just facing a new one here in a couple of years. But the 1984 Olympics really was her vision for, and the colors she chose. And, she was given this palette, red, white, blue. Isn't that original? And she's like, no, it's not Los Angeles. Los Angeles is, magenta and aqua and, all these wonderful 80s colors, acid yellow. And she was drawing from the multiculturalism, of course, India and Mexico, and she was like, well, let's celebrate this. And what became then the iconic look of the Olympics. And that's so alive and so present in all of her work. And so I love going to the Grand Park because it's a bit of a, there's the nostalgia, of course, of the Olympics, that moment where we actually turned the smog off. I don't know if you know that, but the Los Angeles, they decided that, all the oil refineries would take a break, so it's probably the clearest the skies, and everybody left LA because they didn't want to be, so there was very little traffic. It was this magical, 2-week moment. I was a student at UCLA and I was like, wow, this is nice. It's like you can actually turn the smog off. So anyway, so you go to Grand Park, and I was there protesting, with Ash, of course, multiple times. And it's the place that we go and we love, and it reminds us of what's really wonderful about Los Angeles. So that's my second choice.
I love it too. I've been there mostly for protests, I have to say.
Yes, I know, right? That's where we end up, and it's where it's, you now have the concerts there, and you have celebrations and fireworks, and so it's not just protests, but yes, it is a really great place for people to speak. The place of protest, I think, is I think really important for Los Angeles. And one of the things when I talk about students about places of protests, and I ask them, well, when you protest, where do you protest? And Grand Park comes up, of course, but the other place, of course, is the freeways. And we saw many of the protests, and when they begin to swarm the freeways and stop the traffic. And part of it is because where it's this arterial system that exists everywhere, and our city is so large, and people find the place in their neighborhoods that they can make a statement and have an effect on the city and an impact on the city through what they believe. And I think the freeways are kind of interesting. Not, it's a little scary, definitely, especially when you're driving down the freeway and you see people, invading the space of the car, and you're afraid for them. But like it, love it or not, it's definitely effective.
And quintessentially LA.
Quintessentially Los Angeles.
I love that there's a color through line in your choices, because I always associate you with color for obvious reasons.
Yes.
Looking at you right now.
Yeah. No, so the arriving in Los Angeles and all the color, the twinkling lights, and then of course the Grand Park, and she was way ahead of her time with the pink, so all the pink furniture that you see there. And when I think of Deborah Sussman, she really, really determined the colors of Los Angeles. She really, really nailed it. The sort of fluorescent Technicolor, that kind of an acid edge to it. And, we think of it as very 80s. And yet, of course, here we are, revisiting, falling in love with this palette. And there's nothing like it. So yay, Deborah.
Yes, yay, Deborah. And thank you for paying tribute to her in that way.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, I was the director of the gallery on Hollywood Boulevard for 10 years. And Barbara Bester, I mentioned her twice now. She and a group of people, Catherine Gudis, Thomas Krakauer, Shannon Starkey, it was in 2013, and then had a show of her work. And there was these, massive super graphics, of course, that was really her language, Deborah's language, but she was there and she spoke. It was amazing. And then there we were right on Hollywood Boulevard celebrating this incredible woman and her partner. And it was just
beautiful.
Good times. Yeah. So my third choice, I'm going to follow the pink trail. And my third choice is also slightly ephemeral, and it's the games, Angel City Football Club games at the BMO Stadium, formerly the Bank of California Stadium, designed by Gensler. Last year, Angel City, Los Angeles, got its first expansion women's professional soccer team.
Yeah.
They have seen the billboards. But yeah, their colors are pink and black, which I think are perfect for LA. Again, the sort of sunshine and, the dark and light. So there was a group of us who got together, and we now have season tickets, and we go, several times a month at this, Doris Sung and Rick Gooding and Dana Cuff and Jennifer Schaub and Amy Murphy, Esther Margulies. So it's just really great. And Michael Malton now joins us, and Kevin Daly now. So the architecture fun group. But we go and we celebrate these powerful women out on the pitch, just playing their hearts out. I never imagined myself to be a sports team enthusiast, but there I am rooting for this team. And I think what's so wonderful, of course, I live really close to Dodger Stadium, and I'll get to that in a second. And, LA is full of these sports stadia. And I think we have this really amazing, it is, again, a place of collection for the city, and where we come together in our shared love of these teams. Just the joy of being together and celebrating all, in unison, I think, is just this really wonderful moment. But what's wonderful, first of all, the stadium is beautiful, and Gensler did a fantastic job with the design. So there's not a bad seat in the house. So it's something like 22,000 people. And, even the nosebleed seats, the first time I went was for the LA Football Club, and way up, high up, you still felt like, oh my gosh, I could see everything, on the field, and you felt like you were part of it. And that was really, really beautifully designed. But our seats are situated right behind the, one of the corners, the corner kick area. And we're very low down, of course. But from our seats, we can see there's like an opening in this canopy. And you look out and you see, first of all, you see the palm trees. And then you see downtown Los Angeles, the towers of downtown LA. And usually it's, of course, at dusk and you're seeing the reflected light in the buildings. And then behind that, you see the mountains. And you're like, I'm in LA. There you are in the heart of Los Angeles, right off the freeway. And, the Coliseum is right there, USC. You've taken the metro to get there because you do not want to spend $45 for parking. And you feel like, wow, the city really works. It's just this magical moment. So kudos to Gensler for putting together this really amazing stadium that really does so much justice to not just the teams, but also the city. So
the city, yeah. And you can get there by metro.
Yes. You have to walk about 2 blocks, but you're walking through Exposition Park. So you walk through the Rose Garden and, the Armory and, and there you're seeing the new construction going up. The Lucas, all the new construction over there. And then you walk past the CAM, the CAAM Museum, and of course the Coliseum, which was built in World War I to honor the soldiers of World War I. So, and then you see the sculptures there. It's a really great walk from the metro to the stadium and then into the stadium where you're surrounded. It is incredibly family friendly. There are families. You don't see, I lived in London for many years, right in Arsenal territory, where at the end of the game, all the hooligans would literally take over the tube. It was awful. And you always just like, I am, especially as a woman, it's like, I'm not going to be, hanging out there. But these games, and I think kudos to Angel City and their team. I mean, of course, that the owners are, it's a whole group of women, a lot of actors. And they've really worked to develop a sort of fan base that's incredibly, LGBTQ friendly, family friendly. You don't see drunk people there. It is the most joyous, safe experience you can imagine. It's really beautifully designed. And all along one end is the standing seats. And there you have the drum squad. And that was also something that was brought over by, Europe and also Latin America. You have these drum squads and they're drumming the whole time. And it really lifts your spirits. And the last game I was at, they had the women's mariachi band that started the game. And again, I think Angel City and their whole leadership team have done a really fantastic job in celebrating a part of the city that didn't really have a place to celebrate and call their own,
And how are they doing? Because I haven't been following.
Oh, I don't think they're doing very well. So we don't talk about that. They did pretty well in the first year. I mean, it's interesting. There's this whole HBO special. If you haven't seen it, it's really, I would never have watched this documentary about an expansion soccer team. It's fascinating. And they talk about how they really changed the way they do business. For example, if somebody gets hurt, they don't trade them. They had made some really difficult decisions, but it was also to create this team spirit that, it took LAFC, I think, because Rick Gooding, one of my colleagues, he goes to both teams. It took them about 5 years to get to, championship status. So I figure, let's give this team a little bit of time. What's fun about the HBO special, they talk about this moment where Angel City tickets were in hotter demand than, the Dodgers or any other sports team, the Staples Center. So it's kind of, again, there is a market for this. LA is the perfect place. It's kind of shocking that it took until last year to have our own team. But I think it's important also to support them. So my number 4 is the backyard.
Yours or any backyard?
Well, I might as well use it as an opportunity to talk about my backyard. But we just ran into each other in somebody's backyard.
An incredible backyard.
It is where we run into each other. It's where I have friends just down the street. We do movie night in their backyard. We have, we host our block party in our backyard. So every couple times a year. So the backyard is, of course, LA is a city of the single family home. And I'm sure people are talking about these remarkable homes that we have here, Schindler House, Lautner, there's just such a, wealth. It really defined Los Angeles, especially in the mid-century era. But I think the backyard is really the space where we collect and we gather. And so I live in Echo Park, and we own a duplex. We live up in Elysian Heights. We live here in the hills. It's a sort of pseudo dingbat, Rainer Banham term. It's one of those that's lifted up, and you park underneath it. But the view from our deck where we live, 50% of our time, we're outside on our deck doing everything. I can see the DWP building, one of my favorite buildings.
Me too.
Of course, it's Martin, and I love, especially at night. I mean, it is this beautiful, this horizontal brise soleil, and then the glass behind it. It is such a smart design. Bonaventure Hotel. I had my prom there. John Portman, the Atrium Hotel, which was this sort of fabulous, futuristic building with the mirror glass.
And the elevators.
These fantastic elevators that take you to the top. But from the outside, you have this wonderful, I can see downtown. I see the reflection of the sun. I don't see the sunset. I see the reflection of the sun in the downtown towers. And it's just so beautiful. Again, it's like these orange, brilliant yellows and pinks and purples, and City Hall. I see City Hall again, the colors, and especially during the pandemic, I would look out and I would always look to see what are the colors of City Hall. And then I'd look up, to see, well, what are they celebrating today? It's a falling down, horrible stucco box that we live in. It's the nadir of Los Angeles architecture. But from here, we live in, the Elysian, we're just a few minutes from downtown, but we have this incredibly verdant, valley that we live in, that we feel really lucky. And so let me just tell you what the most magical thing about living here is the sound. And and I don't know if they still do it, but they used to do this, the sounds of Los Angeles.
Yes.
And the two sounds that we hear, one is, of course, we're right by the police station, and the police academy. And so very early in the morning, we will hear the shooting range, and it sounds like thunder. It's like, you hear the volley of all the cadets, practicing shooting. Not the greatest sound, but
Could be stressful for some people.
Quintessentially Los Angeles, along with the helicopter sounds. But the other sound is the sound I can see the palm trees around Dodger Stadium is the home runs, and we hear the crowds, and all we hear is the roar of this joyous crowd. So when the Dodgers are doing well, we just hear a lot of, this really wonderful sound that just fills our valley. And we feel like when Elton John played, there we were on the deck, watching the Disney live feed, hearing him singing, and it's magical. So yeah, the sounds of Los Angeles, it's very much a part of our backyard. And I think the backyard is just such a there you are, Thanksgiving dinner, right? We've all been there, sitting out on the deck with our friends who have flown in from, New York, New Hampshire, wherever. And you're like, yeah, this is LA. It's 70 degrees. We're outside, sunshine. We're out on the deck, and we're just celebrating this wonderful city that we live in. So
we are so fortunate. We really are.
We really are.
Yeah. I love that, just the concept of the backyard. But I do want to make a little pitch that it doesn't exist only with single family homes, because as you probably know, our dear mutual friend, Francis, this wonderful book about multifamily housing in LA. And one of the things that she celebrates in that book is that many of these multifamily complexes have wonderful spaces for gathering.
Right.
Embedded into them, and that becomes part of the
So I mentioned that we own a duplex, so our tenants, we share the backyard. So yes. And that amazing book that Francis wrote that really celebrates the multifamily experience, and we're living it. I mean, when we bought the duplex, we bought it with friends of ours, and people were like, "You guys are crazy." And I'll tell you, it was hard getting insurance. It was just like, it's just, who does that? Nobody, this was 2005. And people were like, you guys are crazy, but it was all we could, we couldn't afford anything more. And so we, joined forces with this other family. They now moved to Oakland and sold the other half to us. But yeah, at the time it was we were a 2-family, live in this duplex.
That's such a lovely solution. That way you get to choose your neighbor.
It
right?
worked. It worked. I mean, then
together.
Yeah, it was very much a village, communal living, and we shared meals together, and we paid everything. Gardener, it's like we were doing everything together. So it was a good way to get get your feet wet into the impossible real estate market here in Los Angeles. But once in a while LA Times does a good job of covering these kind of, you'll read about groups that come together to co-purchase properties, and I think that's the future. And and one really great solution is co-owning. And I think it's it flies against the sort of trope of ownership, but there's so many pluses. They moved out before I had our child, but boy, did I miss them. When you have a baby, you're like, oh my God, you're looking for the group of people who can support and help you and babysit and all those things. But yeah, I think those are the kind of pluses of that kind of communal family living. So I'm so glad that Frances wrote that really remarkable book, and the multifamily is absolutely where it's at. Yeah, and what's wonderful about Echo Park, I mean, certainly way more when we moved in, but it really is multicultural, and you still have families who've lived here for 30, 40 years, and it's obviously not just the backyard, but the front yard as well. And there's this, especially when there's a Dodger game, you have the whole family sitting out on the front porch and really just celebrating, shooting off fireworks, and the dogs, the kids, everybody running around and they're barbecuing. And that's so much, it's still here. And, I hope it stays, but it's something to really cherish and protect, that kind of, again, communal living and celebrating the neighborhood. So, and we got to know, I mean, we know all of our neighbors because we all do, trick-or-treating together. We used to when they were really little, so that's how we got to know all of our neighbors. But we know them all, and you share boundaries, and the backyard is this sort of porous boundary with all these other neighbors. And our neighbors immediately to my left here, I mean, literally, they will, oh, you're home from work, here's a Negroni. It's like, oh my God, you are the best neighbor ever.
That is fantastic.
It's amazing. So that's number 4. And number 5, and I see we're running out of time, so I'll keep this close. But I talked about the sanctuary, and as you know, I'm an educator, so I chose the community college. And these educational, and maybe you can broaden it to the educational institutions throughout Southern California. But we have again, we're so lucky to be in a place that has fine public education.
Yeah.
And the community colleges, I'm now teaching at East Los Angeles Community College. It's amazing to be on this campus. It is the largest community college in California. It enrolls something like 35,000 students. It's in Monterey Park, actually, on Avenida Cesar Chavez. Just a couple miles from downtown LA. I literally drive under the 6th Street Viaduct every day, and wow. It's a really wonderful, sometimes I just take Sunset, again, it's a really wonderful commute, and beginning to explore this neighborhood that I wasn't that familiar with. But the LA Community College District, we have 9 campuses, and it's an elected board, which is kind of interesting. So it adds this sort of public dimension to the educational. It offers free education. But the reason I chose it is because, the colleges, and I think the universities as well, have become the sort of the neighborhood centers, and they provide not just education and workforce training, but you have healthcare, you have mental health care, you have food banks, you have housing, you have so vaccination and, testing. And so they've become these centers for neighborhoods that often are lacking, what maybe used to be a religious, some place that the community would come together. But these communities, the high schools around the neighborhood all have their graduations at ELAC. So, you literally have like 3 graduations a day during graduation season, but you're seeing all these high school students coming in. You have these athletic fields that brings in people from all over. We have the swimming pool that, and the ELAC has also really great architecture on it. And most people don't know this. So you have the Vincent Price Art Museum that was designed by Architectonica. Center complex that was just finished by Ehrlich, Renai, Ree, Cheney, 2016. Beautiful student center building. The Language Arts and Humanities, HGA, House and Robertson. So you have this, laboratory, and as somebody teaching architecture, you're like, okay, now we can go out and look at some of these really cool buildings right here in your backyard and begin to appreciate it. So I think these places provide a safety net for and fill a gap that the society, that our social fabric very often has these openings. So 25% of our students are housing insecure. In fact, the studio that I'm going to be teaching this fall with Roger Sherman of Gensler came to me and said, we offer you a sponsored studio, $60,000. And we cooked up this idea that we would take, there's a very large parking garage, and the idea is to convert it into the unhoused student population, and to put in a sort of micro housing village there. And I presented that recently at a breakfast that the AIA hosted with Mayor Bass. And she and her team were like, this sounds amazing. Think about the city and think about all those parking garages that are now empty, especially the top deck. And now think about, building shelters there. My husband and I, our firm, we just renovated the Los Angeles Mission in downtown. So
wow.
Had to work with Mayor Garcetti's office. That was a really amazing project. But yeah, now, trying to think about, here's these places that are safe, they're protected, but can then provide sanctuaries and housing for the students, who don't have homes or live out of their cars. I just read an article, and I'll send it to you. 20,000 people in Los Angeles live in their cars. I didn't know that. I knew there were people living in RVs and cars. I did not realize it was something like 20,000. And they think that's an undercount, of course, because it's so hard to count.
Right.
So yeah. I mean, the public libraries is another, so some of the ones didn't make the list. The public library, I love the downtown. Whiskey A Go-Go, that was on my list because I used to be music was really important. Hollywood Boulevard. And Busch Gardens in Van Nuys. I don't know if you remember Busch Gardens, but you were literally put onto a car and you were like a beer bottle, and you went through this factory, and you ended up in this amazing tropical garden with flamingos, and it was the most bizarre, surreal experience. Of course, it's not there anymore. And Anheuser-Busch right there in Van Nuys, right across from Tommy's. But so those are some ones that didn't make my list, but I thought I wanted to end with the community college as a sanctuary and use that as an opportunity. I thought, wouldn't it be fun to have my students do this exercise? And it's how I'm learning about my neighborhood. So last semester, I invited them to bring in photographs of their favorite murals. I cannot tell you how amazing that assignment was. And we just had this wonderful conversation. Many of them memorialize people or places, and they're beautiful, and they just celebrate art and color. And so that would be, I would love to, I'm going to ask, in fact, I am going to ask my students to do this exercise in pairs to identify their 5 favorite places in Los Angeles.
That's wonderful.
So yeah. Passing the baton.
Yes. And if your students are doing this exercise, maybe there's some way we can put a web page together or something.
I would love that. Yeah.
I'd love to hear their 5 places.
Exactly. I know. And they're going to be so different from ours, and
yes.
yeah, that would be great. Do you have an Instagram page? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, because that could be
Yeah.
a way also that they post their 5 favorites or something like that. you know.
Yes, yes. We have a website and an Instagram page and a YouTube channel. So let's stay
Yeah,
in touch on that and figure
let's do
out.
that. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing those extraordinary 5 places that are all much broader themes than just single places. And I
Yeah.
love that.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's very much you, Ingalill. It's wonderful.
Trying to
Very.
embrace the city.
To learn more about Ingalill's work and the people and places mentioned in this conversation, please check out the show notes. We like to make the notes as thorough as possible, with links to explore the topics discussed. To hear more stories of the places that define Los Angeles, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're enjoying the show, we would so appreciate if you would leave us a rating, a review, or share it with friends. We are a small, dedicated volunteer team, and every rating and every review helps keep the show going. 5 Places is produced by Quinn Wynn and me, Emmanuelle Bourlier, for the LA Forum for Architecture and Urban Design. We recorded on Chumash and Tongva land. Thank you for listening.
The only word I know in Finnish, and I may mispronounce it, is kisa. Kisa? Does it mean cat? Because
Oh yeah, Kisa. Yeah.
the neighbors, whenever they wanted the dog to go outside, they'd open the door and go, Kisa. And the
Kisa.
dog would go chasing outside. So when I was a kid, we named our cat Kisa.
Kisa. Yes, that's so cute.
I love it. And then in
Yeah.
Toronto, our neighbors were Finnish.
Oh, nice.
In Toronto, which is,
Yeah.
as I'm sure you know, a very multicultural.
Toronto's an amazing city.
Yeah.
I lived in upstate New York for a while in Corning when I was teaching it in Cornell.
Of course. Yeah.
And but Buffalo, of course, in Toronto, that was my weekend, jaunt and exploring Canada.
Buffalo Modern Art Museum.
I know, and the Frank Lloyd Wright, it was just like, wow, this is a beautiful, beautiful city. And I can show you now the piece that I was referring to, the Deborah Sussman. It's right here in my kitchen. So this is this beautiful, isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
Yeah. And so it was designed by, and it's a little Escherith. You can see the sort of transformation of the flowers to the wooden shoes, or the alligators to the, so there's a umbrella. So, and it was Deborah Sussman.
Oh,
yeah.
I love it.
Yes, that was part of the poster for the WUHO show that we did. But my whole, this is Jim Welling. So these were all these WUHO exhibitions. This is
I love your place. The light, wonderful.
Again, we just ripped out walls. This is John Ireland. So this is that's Paul Revere Williams. So yeah, so these are, and then this is my husband, and one of my colleagues. So this was the LAX airport. They're Marimekko. So these are all Marimekko because that's my childhood. So.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that fabulous tour.
Yes, and there's my piano. So yes, so I played the keyboard.
You still play. Good.
I don't play very much anymore, but
you still have it.
I still have it. I was just playing the House of the Rising Sun for my kid because they love that song. So.
A good song. It's a really good song.
I know, especially on the piano.
Yeah. Doesn't that look?
Oh yeah, that's exactly.
Might even be it.
It must be it because yes, it is it. I'd love to see how are they referencing it? Yeah.
It's a book on visual intelligence about sharpening your perception.
Yeah, there's the umbrellas to the boots.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it's a
yeah, that's so interesting.
I'd be curious to know if that's actually Deborah Sussman or. And I think
a nice quote. The world is full of magic things patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper.
That's a good one.
Existential chrysalis.